This is a tutorial on mixing color with watercolors. If you've never used watercolor before, mixing the color you want can be a little bit tricky. I'm going to try to make it a little bit easier for you. But first, let's familiarize ourselves with my palette of colors. One of the things I'm thinking about when I'm choosing what colors to use is to have a warmer version of a color and a cooler version of the color on my palette. What do I mean by warmer? Well, a color is warm if it's closer to red or yellow. A color is cool if it's closer to green or blue. So if you look at these two yellows, this is Gamboge hue. It's a slightly more orangish yellow than this one, which if it wasn't polluted by green already, you can tell is slightly more pure yellow, slightly closer to green, let's put it this way. Let's take a look at these two greens. We've got a cooler green, slightly almost pushing towards turquoise here, and a warmer green. This is a slightly warmer green too, right? So this is Sap Green, this is Hooker's Green. When it comes to the blues, I also have a range of blues ranging from slightly cooler, more greenish, to slightly more purplish in my ultramarine. That's number one. Same thing with my reds, right? So I've got a slightly warmer red, a red that leans a little bit more towards the yellow, and this red, which is Cadmium Red Dark, is a little bit more violet, a little bit more blue, and then I have Alizarin, which is really blue, right? It leans really close to the blues. Why is this important? It allows me to mix a much larger range of color that is more vibrant. If you only have one temperature of yellow, you'll find it limiting, and everybody will see why in a second when I start doing my color charts. What else? I also have a range of earth tones. Now, these colors can easily be mixed by muddying my prismatic, my bright saturated colors, but you'll find that these are shortcut colors. These are colors that will allow you to achieve your color mix faster. So it's definitely useful, particularly if you're doing landscape, because landscape has lots of neutral colors, to have some earth tones. So I've got some earth tones here, my yellow ochre, my raw sienna, burnt sienna. This is Indian red. It's a rust color, sometimes called Venetian red, sometimes it's called red oxide. I also have a couple of browns, a warm brown and a cool brown. So this is burnt umber and this is sepia, which is very, very close to black. And then I do have black on my palette, but I very, very rarely use it. It's a color that doesn't play well with others. We're not going to be using it when we're doing watercolor. Now, sometimes you do want some kind of nasty gray color. So I do have black on my palette for that possibility, but mostly black is to be avoided, particularly when you're working transparently in watercolor. Another thing that's really helpful is to make a little color chart and to mark off the pigments and the brand names on these little charts. It allows you to see the color effectively, because quite often you can't see what the actual color is when it's opaque. It only comes out vibrant and shines when it's applied semi-transparently, and the white of the paper is glowing underneath the color. So that's why it's really helpful to have a little chart. Do I really need this chart? No, I don't. I know this brand, I know how well it works, I know exactly what colors I'm going to get out of these things. But when you're a beginner, these things are a little bit hard to anticipate, and it's good to have this little color chart marked down. And then if you need to replace the color, you can remember what the actual color was. So that's really, really useful. Why do I have more of some colors than others? Well, I tend to go through a lot of ultramarine blue. I tend to go through a lot of this green, white. Well, I haven't been doing a lot of painting with white lately, though I do. Sometimes I work on tone paper, which is why it's there. So it's useful to have a little bit more of the color. This is my sepia color. I'll explain why I have so much of this sepia and this blue in a second. Okay, so there's my palette. Now let's start mixing some color wheels. So I have an image of a color wheel up on the screen. We're going to try to imitate it by choosing 3 of our primary colors. What are primary colors? Primary colors are, yes, yellow, blue, and red. They're colors that cannot be mixed. They are primary. They cannot be mixed out of any other colors. We're going to start up here and put a yellow swatch here. So this is going to be yellow up here. this way. And then on this corner, we're going to put blue. And in this corner, we're going to place red, like this. Now, the question is, we have that color chart. Which of my colors are actually closest to being primary? The reality is, none of them are. All the colors are a little tiny bit off. There's not a single color there that is perfectly primary. So we're going to try our different kinds of yellows and mix a few different color charts to understand the properties of my different colors. So I'm going to start off with the most obvious choice. This yellow is probably closest to primary than this one. I'm going to see if I can clean it up a little bit so it's not polluted with green. This is my cadmium yellow light. Very, very strong yellow. The only disadvantage is that the pigment is slightly toxic, so be careful when you use it. Make sure you keep your hands clean. The disadvantage is that it's a slightly opaque pigment, and opaque pigments can end up looking a little bit muddy when you're working with watercolor. Alright, so this is my cadmium yellow. For my blue, let's choose, well, probably the most obvious choice is this. This is my Cobalt Blue. It's very, very close to prismatic blue. Or is it? Let's take a look. Cobalt Blue is a very expensive pigment. It's one of the more expensive pigments in this set. But very, very good for landscape because it sort of closely approximates the color of the sky sometimes. So Cobalt Blue is a really good color to have. One of the more important blues to have on your palette. Alright, then we have a range of reds to choose from. It's definitely not going to be Alizarin, which is more purplish, but we have a choice between Cadmium Red Light and Cadmium Red Deep. Let's start off with my Cadmium Red Light. Which of these colors is close to prismatic? Like I said, probably neither one, probably something in between. Alright, so now we're going to blend the colors and see what the secondary colors, what kind of secondary colors are being created with my color choices. Let's start off with the yellow. I'm going to extend my yellow a little bit towards the red, like this. And then I'm going to take a little bit of my red and extend it a little bit towards my yellow, like this. I'm going to clean off my brush, dry it off a little bit, and then wiggle the paint around and see where it goes in terms of color. Trying to make something that looks like a color wheel, it's going to end up more like some kind of triangle. Not a problem. So let me drag a little bit more pigment this way. I want to get good saturation here. By the way, I'm using Windsor Newton cold press watercolor paper. Holds the washes really well. It's a brand I definitely recommend. Okay, this is pretty vibrantly orange. Not too bad. Pretty good. Now let's connect our blue and red together. So I'm going to drag a little bit of my red towards my blue. This is a good exercise not only for learning about color, but also about controlling washes, blending colors together. So even if you know about the color wheel, and there's more to know about the color wheel than you think, actually, this is a good exercise in learning how to blend colors together. Now I'm going to drag a little bit of my blue into the red. Let's see what that looks like. And we're getting something that is less than ideal in terms of looking for a purple. So we know blue and red obviously make a purple. Not in this case, they don't. They're actually mixing up a little bit gray. Now the colors in my studio are not ideal. They're not perfect. But even with this poor lighting, you can tell that I'm not getting anything close to a vibrant purple. All right, we'll talk about that in a second. Let's connect my blue with my yellow. Let's see what that looks like. So I'll take a little of my blue. Make sure it's clean. Try to clean off your brush. And by the way, keep switching out your water if it starts getting cloudy or dirty. Let's put it that way. You might need to change it out. All right, so I'm going to take a little bit of my blue and start going towards my yellow. This way. And then let's take a little bit of my yellow. Really clean off your brush well. Yellow is very easily polluted. Let's start with my yellow and let's start aiming towards okay, something else is happening. We were expecting a really bright green because yellow and blue make green. Our greens here, not as bright as expected. All right, so the question is, why am I getting a fairly vibrant orange and yet I'm not getting a vibrant purple or a vibrant green? Once again, it's because our colors are not purely prismatic. The Cad yellow is very, very close. However, this Cad red light is a little bit closer to orange than it is to pure red. Why is this really, really important? Well, if we need to mix a purple, we need a color that's more close to pure red, because if this color has a little bit of yellow in it, the yellow is going to cancel out the purple and create gray. So the yellow pollution in this color, the yellow contamination, is contaminating the purple, and because purple we know is the opposite of yellow, a complementary color, the yellow in this red is canceling the purple out. The same thing is happening here. This blue is not perfectly prismatic. It's a slightly warmer blue. It's a slightly more purplish blue. And because red is the opposite of green, when I'm trying to mix green, the little bit of red pollution, contamination in this blue is canceling out the brightness of the blue, the brightness of the green, and creating a slightly grayish green. Now, nothing wrong with these colors. They're actually quite beautiful. Sometimes you need a soft purple, and you don't mind this kind of mixture. But you have to recognize that if I want a brighter purple, I need to start using a cooler red, a red that has a little more blue in it. And if I need to get a brighter green, I need to choose a blue that has a little bit more green in it, that is more closely prismatic. All right, so now we're going to do another color chart with my other yellow. I've got my Gamboge here. I'm going to use a different kind of red and a different kind of blue and see what happens. Okay, so this color chart was made with Cad Yellow Light. This red was made with Cad Red Light. Our blue was Cobalt Blue. Now let's try a few different prismatic colors, quote unquote, in my palette. We're going to have another yellow here. This yellow is going to be Gamboge. Gamboge hue. Traditional Gamboge is no longer, it's really hard to find. It's not light fast. It's a pigment that doesn't last when exposed to light for long periods of time. And little by little, it's been eliminated from people's palettes. Okay, let's choose a different red. So I'm going to choose Cad Red Dark. And for my blue, I'm going to use my Prussian Blue. Let's see what this looks like. Start off with the Gamboge. Gamboge is one of those colors that looks quite different in the cake form than it does on paper. It's a very, very transparent pigment, which means that it's really good for watercolor. It's a very common, popular pigment, which even though it looks slightly duller than the Cad yellow in the box, sometimes will actually look brighter on paper because of the increased transparency. All right, now let's put in my Cad Red Dark on this side. All the cadmium colors are quite strong. That's their advantage, which means that you don't need a lot of them. They will last you a long time, which is good because they're expensive. They tend to be more expensive pigments. Again, they're toxic. Be careful when handling them. Okay, now let's try Prussian Blue. Now you see that the Prussian Blue is considerably more turquoisey, greener than Cobalt. All right, now let's try connecting these. I'll start off my Gamboge and start working it towards my red this way. Let's get a touch of my red and start working it towards my Gamboge. And let's see what happens. Well, not surprisingly, we got a darker orange that's also a little bit muddier. Why? Because our Cad Red Dark is almost purplish, right? It has a little bit of violet in it, and since blue is the opposite of orange, the blue is going to cancel out the orange a little bit and create a muddier effect. No surprise there. Now let's get a little bit of our Cad Red Dark and start working it towards our blue, like this. And we're getting color that also is pretty muddy. No surprise there, obviously, because in this case, even though our Cad Red Dark is close to purple, our greenish Prussian Blue, I was going to say, has a lot of green in it and is polluting our purple. Right, so green has yellow in it. The yellow is canceling out the purple. So in this case, the yellow in the red was canceling out the purple. In this case, the yellow in our blue is canceling out the purple and creating a muddy color. Now I notice it's a slightly different color, slightly different effect. It's leaking all over the place than this color. That's good to know. That's good to know. It creates a slightly different color, muddy color here to here. This is part of getting familiar with the way your pigments work and allowing you to mix colors more accurately. Okay, so we're extending our Gamboge a little more towards our Prussian Blue. And let's get our Prussian Blue and extend it towards the Gamboge. Okay, you can see that, well, hopefully you can see, that the green being mixed here is also slightly muddy. So it's not a pure green, but it's about the same equivalent. Why? Well, our Gamboge is slightly orange, slightly reddish. The red pollution in the Gamboge is canceling out the green and creating gray. Okay, let's do one more. Let's try another one. Since I have 3 different kinds of yellows, might be good to do 3 different color charts. If you have less, well, do less color charts. You don't need to do quite as many. Alright, so here I'm going to use Indian yellow. It's another transparent yellow. Originally it was made from concentrated cow urine. Cows were fed on mango leaves. I believe it no longer is. Okay, then we're going to use our Alizarin Crimson here. And then we're going to use our Ultramarine Blue here. All right, let's see what this looks like. Indian yellow is a tricky yellow in that it looks very different in the box than it does outside on the paper. Let's see what this looks like. I'm out of room. Let me clean up my palette a little bit. So the color looks kind of orangey here. But when diluted, you can see that it mixes slightly less orange than my Gamboge. Now the question is, why do I have both Gamboge and Indian yellow on my palette? I don't know. Probably excessive. They're somewhat used interchangeably. Okay, here is our Alizarin Crimson. And Ultramarine Blue. Ultramarine Blue for me is a very, very important color. Since I do lots of landscape, it's really good for skies. But mostly I use it for mixing neutral colors in combination with burnt umber. So we're going to talk about that in a second. It's a slightly weaker blue probably than Cobalt. But I tend to like my colors on the softer side. I tend not to like colors that are super, super bright, like phthalo blue. Okay, now let's do another color chart here. Let's start off with our Indian yellow. Let's drag a little bit of it towards my alizarin. Okay, it's giving me a pretty nice looking orange. It's not really bright, but it's certainly going to be more vibrant than this. Now, why is that the case? Even though our Indian yellow doesn't have quite so much orange in it? Well, listen, some pigments are just brighter than others. Our alizarin is a little more transparent than their cadmium color. It's a slightly more vibrant color. So you can get a slightly more vibrant result by mixing alizarin with Indian yellow than you would cadmium red. So this is where things get really, really complicated. You've got the color wheel, which you're still seeing up on the screen, and then there's the actual practical effects of working with different kinds of pigment, their relative opacities, their relative vibrancy. So we're no longer in the realm of color theory. This is now color practice. This is what color looks like on the paper, interacting with other colors. Color theory is important. Color practice is even more important. Now, take a look at this purple. Look how rich it is. Why? Because our ultramarine blue is a purplish blue. Our alizarin crimson is a purplish red. If I want to mix a really vibrant purple, this is the way to go. Ultramarine blue, alizarin, probably stronger. You'll mix a stronger purple than cobalt blue, which doesn't have as much red in it. Not too bad. Let's drag a little bit of alizarin towards ultramarine, towards the yellow. And let's see what that looks like. All right, well, as expected, we're using a warm yellow. Our green is not perfectly green. It's got some gray in it, right? The warmer red color is polluting our greens a little bit, but it's not too bad. Look, greens aren't radioactive in nature, so quite often by mixing greens out of a yellow and blue, you'll get something that's more subtle, more accurate, has more complexity to it than mixing green straight, taking green straight out of the tube and using that. This is one of those little tricks of landscape painting. Mix your greens out of other colors. That's a really important rule. All right, so we've got 3 color charts using our different kinds of yellows. So you can see, in order to mix a strong green, we need to take a greenish blue and a cool yellow. So probably this and this are going to mix a much stronger green. Let's do that. Here is my Prussian Blue. And now let's take my Cad Yellow, my very lemony, cool Cad Yellow, and you can see it mixes up much stronger, right? A much more vibrant green than my other color mixtures. We already have a strong purple right here. If you want a strong orange, well, we already have one, right? Cad Yellow Light with Cad Red Light. But maybe an even stronger orange might be Indian Yellow, which we have here. Indian Yellow plus Cad Red Light. Those colors are closer to each other. They're sort of in between. You can see what a vibrant orange that is, which beats out this one. Okay, so I recommend, if you have a number of different colors, to play with different color charts. In the next color chart, we're going to arrange all of our colors in their proper spot in the color wheel. The next exercise is considerably more difficult. We're going to take all of our colors and organize them along our color chart. We're going to start off with the colors that we think are closest to prismatic. Let's mark them off. So here we're going to have our Cad Yellow Light. I think that's closest. Then over here, we're going to spread this out a little bit because we're going to have lots of colors. I think probably our Cad Red Light is the closest. Cad Red Light. Cad Red Light. And then over here we have a choice either between Ultramarine Blue or Cobalt Blue. Which one is it? Probably the Cobalt Blue wins out. But again, probably something in between Cobalt and Ultramarine is perfect. Something in between Cad Red Dark and Cad Red Light is perfect. We're not going to worry about that right now. Let's just spread these out so that we have as much room to fit all of our other colors in between them. So here we have our Cobalt Blue. All right, so start off with those colors. In this case, we're not going to blend it together. We're just going to have color swatches running through. Let's do our Cad Red Light. We don't need a lot of these colors. Here's Cad Red Light. Let's clean off our brush really well, and Cobalt Blue. By the way, these colors will vary depending on the brand. The cheaper brands of Cobalt will not have any cobalt in them at all. They'll just be some version of ultramarine. Ultramarine is a really good pigment, but it's less expensive than cobalt and is quite often used to replace cobalt. The same thing for other colors like cadmium yellow, cadmium red. In the cheaper brands, they'll be replacements, synthetics of the cadmium. Okay, now let's start off with the yellow, our yellows, and think about where to place our Indian Yellow and our Gamboge. Now it's a little bit tricky because really these two colors are pretty close to each other. Which one is a little bit more yellow, which one's a little bit more orange? I think this Indian Yellow is a touch more yellow than the Gamboge, which runs a little bit more orange. So I'm going to place my Indian Yellow. I'm going to place it somewhere here. Like this, right? It's pushing a little bit more towards my orange. This way. But not as much as my Gamboge. Now these colors, again, they're very close to each other. Yep, I got it right. I think this color is just a touch more orange. This way. Okay, we've got quite a leap here. I've got nothing in between. We've got an orange here. But again, since I'm not blending my pigments, I'm just trying to test them for where their place is on our color wheel. I'm going to keep this space a little blank. Okay, so we've got our cadmium red, and then we have a range of colors that are to the left of cadmium red, pushing towards the blue. Let's compare our alizarin with our Cad Red Dark. Here's alizarin, here's Cad Red Dark. Clearly the Cad Red Dark is closer to Cad Red Light than alizarin. Let's do that. It's going to be pretty close, maybe somewhere over here, like this. And our alizarin runs almost violet. It's going to run over here, probably. This color is really not that far away from each other. Again, one of the tricky things about watercolor is that you can't quite see the color you're using until it's on the paper, which is why it's really good to have this done before you start doing these kinds of color charts. Right, so I can see the colors, compare them to each other, because here this color is so much darker in the pan than the Cad Red Deep that it'd be hard to tell exactly what the color is. All right, our cobalt. We've got Ultramarine Blue that runs a little bit towards purple. Let's give my Ultramarine Blue. Again, your pigments, first of all, you may have different pigments, but you also might be using a different brand. I'm using DaVinci brand, actually a mix of DaVinci and some Windsor Newton here and there interspersed. Both are very high quality paint, but other really good brands out there, but their pigments are sourced from different places and might be a little bit different. Okay, so let's keep going. We've got Cobalt Blue. We've got one other blue on our palette that definitely runs above Cobalt Blue towards the yellow, towards our greens. Our very turquoisey Prussian Blue. Almost turquoise. And then we have the difficult task of dealing with our three greens. Let's take a look at them. Well, clearly this is the most yellow of the bunch. This one's might as well be called greenish yellow. It's our Cadmium Green. It's going to be over here, like this. And then we've got two other greens. One is slightly cooler, the other one is slightly warmer. Okay, so this is the Hooker's Green Dark. Let's take a look at it, and then we have Sap Green. Okay, hopefully you guys can see this. The Sap Green is pretty warm. Okay, so it's going to be closer to green. Up. I just polluted my two colors together. Don't do that. Don't pollute your colors. All right, not perfectly aligned, but I want my green to be opposite my red, obviously, right? This is a little more of a color oval than a color wheel. I left just enough room here for my other green. All right, this is really useful to know where your colors sit on the color wheel, because now we know exactly how to cancel them out. Right? So if I need to cancel out this very warm yellowish green, not enough just to add red, I also need to add a little bit of a cooler red, right? So it runs a little bit more towards the cooler in order to neutralize completely. Hope that makes sense. For my cooler green, I need to add a slightly more orangey red than a pure red. So these colors cancel each other out. Now, the last task is to place your earth tones, if you have them on your palette, and figure out where they run relative to the other colors. So all my earth tones are basically darker versions of the prismatic colors. Where are they exactly? If you take a look at yellow ochre, you can see that it is a darker version probably of Gamboge. Right? It probably runs here somewhere, like this. Our raw sienna is darker than yellow ochre, obviously, but it's also a little bit more orangey, so it's going to run probably a little bit over here, like this. Our Indian red is a darker version of Cad Red Light, like this. I'm running out of room a little bit. Let's see, what else? We've got burnt umber. Burnt umber is a dark orange, so it probably runs somewhere right about here, like this. It's not quite red. We also have sepia, which is a very dark, neutral brown. So technically speaking, it's going to be very close to the center, being kind of almost pure neutral, almost like a black, like this. Okay, so another really beneficial exercise, take all your colors and see where they fit in your color wheel. That'll give you a much better familiarity with how the colors actually work in real life.